Hey, everybody. Well, this is a special super secret layer interview with Stephan Chandler-Garcia, part of our regular Dallas Salesforce user group. But we didn't have time. We ran out of sessions for the end of the year, but still had some content to deliver from Stephan Chandler-Garcia, great friend of the group. So we're going to have a quick 45-minute. Hopefully you'll enjoy this video when it finally gets posted. And I don't know why I'm talking as if this is really live, because it's not. So Stephan, thank you very much for joining us again and bringing some more content on Salesforce Functions. This will be a deep dive or whatever you want to show us and what you got to show for what's going on new. I didn't want to wait till next year to get this content out and in the air.
Yep. Well, thanks for having me again. Last month when we were talking, Paul had mentioned that he wanted to have some functions content coming up, and perfectly, I'd been working on a roadshow for our team to take around to all the user groups around functions, how to get started, and a little bit more information. So more than happy to share that today with everyone.
All right, I'll stop sharing and hand everything over to you, sir.
Great. Okay, so I can see the blue glare in Paul's room to know that my slide is working. And so most of you know me by now, but my name is Stephan Chandler-Garcia, and I'm a developer advocate at Salesforce. And today we're going to be talking about Salesforce functions and taking a look at some of the code behind the scenes and some of the cool stuff that you can do with them. And to start out, I do have to give our forward-looking statement. So just please make any purchasing decisions based on our currently available technology and not any of the future features or functionality that we may be talking about today. So just a quick overview, we're going to talk about Salesforce functions in general and how you can get started with them now. We're going to talk about some of the interfaces that we provide for you to use, and we can have a little bit of Q&A. And we're going to have Q&A through the session with Paul anyways. And if you have any questions while you're watching this video, put them in the comments on the YouTube video below, and I'd be happy to respond to them at a later date. So let's start off by taking a step back and looking at the world of cloud computing. A lot of us are very familiar with software as a service. Obviously, we have spent and built our careers around platforms like Salesforce. We have different things like backends as a service. We have platforms as a service for any of us who are building lots of custom apps on Salesforce and using it as a platform, or we have lots of great infrastructure providers like AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, and the list goes on and on and on. And in that stack has emerged this world of functions as a service that allow you to create serverless functions that you can invoke from anywhere, from any application, that allow you to do things with your code. In this case, sort of what is a function? And it's a single purpose, a piece of code that's used for a single purpose that you're calling on demand whenever you need access to it. That's short-lived, and it's a microservice. So putting all those jumble together, it's a bite-sized piece of code that you're using to do something that you don't always need access to, and that you don't have to use all of the complex infrastructure to run. So for example, a function is just a file within Salesforce Functions in your IDE that allows you to take a little piece of JavaScript, a little piece of Java, a little piece of TypeScript, host it, and just call on it on demand when you need it. It's meant to be a quick throwaway action that is super lightweight that can help you achieve a lot.
Now, are you actually forbidden from calling it the lambda calculus derivative name of lambda?
Well, lambda functions are a product of AWS.
I would differ that they branded it, but it was actually derived from lambda calculus being kind of a stateless function, and that's where they came up with their name. But I believe a lambda function still predates AWS, but I could be wrong.
Okay, and that's, I didn't know. And have we just welcomed Megan to the call as well?
Yeah.
Indeed.
Fantastic.
Hello.
Hello. If you have any questions, bring them up during the session. We're going to try and make this as interactive as possible as we go through.
Yep, I'll be asking questions. Yeah. Megan will probably be asking good questions, so that's how you'll be able to tell us apart.
Perfect. And so we've been hearing about Salesforce functions for a while now. So I'm not telling you anything new here. But functions, what's really good about Salesforce functions as opposed to building functions on other platforms is that, number one, they're part of that Salesforce trusted infrastructure, which is super important to a lot of the customers that we're working with, because they like to see their data living inside of that trust boundary. They're super flexible. They scale up and down as you need them. You can write them in multiple languages. Currently, JavaScript, TypeScript, and Java. Python is on the roadmap, calling back to that forward-looking statement, as well as if there are any other languages that people are interested in, please let us know so that we can prioritize them accordingly. And lastly, what makes them even better is that you can use them with a lot of the platform capabilities. You can call them right from Apex. You can call them through Apex into Flow and in other parts of the platform that I think are going to continue growing and expanding and are going to provide a lot of opportunity to have that, just that extra bit of compute power on top of Salesforce.
So I just got to ask really quick. You said Flow.
Yeah.
We all know that Flow Orchestrator is just coming out. So what type of cool stuff could we do there? Like, give an example.
Yeah. So in relation to Flow Orchestrator, so if anyone's listening and isn't aware of Flow Orchestrator, it's a new tool that we provided that lets you sort of stage screen flows, or almost like in a giant workflow process. So say we have something like employee onboarding, where I'm a new hire at the company. I need someone in finance to go and set up my business accounts and all of my payroll. And I need that to then be sent to someone in IT to provision me a computer. You can stage flows to be automatically triggered and sent to those people when it's necessary for them in that stage. So once I've sent all my financial paperwork, we can trigger a flow to go through and provision IT through Orchestrator. And it's super useful. Now, when we talk about calling them from functions, calling functions from Flow, a great use case is like financial calculations. So if you have to do any complex calculations that you're not able to do in Apex, or maybe there's a JavaScript library that you can just import into your function to use instead of having to write all the boilerplate. I've got an example we'll show in a little bit where we're doing some distance calculation through a function so that we can return the nearest point of contact in a flow. And it pretty much offloads anything that you're sort of hitting limits in within Apex when it comes to processing large file sizes, etc. That's when I talk about this slide, like about that elastic scale. It allows you to push outside of the boundaries of what you can do within Apex because of the size and volume of the transaction that you're able to work with, as compared to working in Apex. So for example, if you're working with a file, so say you've done a call out to an API and you're getting back a list of contacts or a list of opportunities from that API, in Apex, you can only handle a file up to 6 megabytes if you're working synchronously and 12 megabytes if you're working asynchronously. But that's really only a couple 100,000 records. And a lot of our large enterprise customers are working with a lot more data than that. And functions are the perfect solution to that because there aren't the same type of limits when it comes to working with that volume of data.
So really quick, so you mentioned finance and the calculators functions. Can you do like an amortization schedule with functions? Like, could that solve all of those problems?
Yeah, totally.
That's a huge pain in Apex and anything.
Yeah. So one of the big ones. So, let's make this unbelievably interactive.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's great. I think it's great. So, let's fast forward quickly.
And really quick, for anyone that hasn't had to do an amortization schedule before, it's like when you buy your car and you have to figure out your payments and the different discounts and the different taxes at the different times. Huge pain in the butt.
If you want to save these for the end, Stephan, this is
no, this is great. So first off, myself and my colleague Julian wrote an app called Functions Recipes that sort of helps you get started with functions. That's on GitHub.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And so this you can use to get all kinds of examples around how to do stuff within functions. Now, we also built a demo for DreamTX last year that did lease calculation on cars. And so it was a function that you could use as a lease calculator that we were calling from a flow, actually. Hold on, let me pull that up. Let's see. So bear with me. Let's see. Actually, you know what? It was in our old repo. I don't have that code handy. However, we were able to go and find an NPM package that did lease calculations for cars and just import it into our function and do the lease calculation in like minutes with the function. And it was super easy, something that's, it's standard, however, not something that you would want to do in Apex.
So I spent weeks and months trying to get an amortization table together that works properly with Apex and works properly with discounts.
Yeah.
Insane.
Yeah.
This is awesome. Oh my gosh, I'm in
so,
love.
So here's an example. And so this example in functions recipes, we call it our process large data function. And this comes from something I needed to do about a year ago. And I was putting together a live session around taking a database that's public online. So code.org have this database of coding schools around the world that they have publicly on an API that they keep updated that you can use as like a programming example. And I wanted to get that data into Salesforce, and I wanted to calculate the distance between that school data and my current location. I wanted to sort it, and then I wanted to display the nearest 5 results to the user, which seems really simple. However, the file is larger than 6 megabytes, and so I had to write an app in Go and put it on Heroku and host my API there, just so that I could get that data into Salesforce to display to a user. And it seemed like a perfect use case with functions because it does some of the things that you can have trouble doing with an Apex, like processing large files and sorting maps. And so I can do that all within the function. And so in here, you can see in the function, let me just collapse this down. I'm importing this file here that we already know it's over 6 megabytes. So normally we wouldn't be able to use it in Apex. Okay, and every time we spin up the function, we're getting that file. And then when we go in here, we have our data property here. And so we're setting data up as event.data, and that's going to pass in the payload from Apex. And so when we look at the constructor, we're passing in the event, which contains things like the payload. We're passing in the context, which is your org info and things about the user who's invoked the function. And then we've got the logger that we can use to log and debug the function. Okay. So in this function, this is written in JavaScript, by the way. We have a Java version as well for anyone who's interested in learning about how to implement this in Java. But you can see here, we've got that data that we're coming in. We're just assigning it to a constant. We're then making sure that the latitude and longitude are present in that property. And if not, we're just going to throw an error. And then you can set the length of results that you would like. So in this case, we've got length here as data.length. And then we have here where we're going to go and do stuff. So first off, just to recap what we're doing. So we've got our event, which has the payload. We're then assigning that to the constant of data. We're making sure that the latitude and longitude are present in that payload. And then we're checking the length. And if it's not been provided, we're just going to set it to 5. So then what we want to do is go through and take all of those schools from that schools data that we imported, that large file, and then we're going to go through and calculate the distance between the current location and those hundreds of thousands of records. And so obviously that's not an easy thing to do. It takes time. And so down here, we have just the math calculation here. Just find the distance between the current latitude and longitude of the user and then the latitude and longitude of the school that's been provided in the sheet. And it's going to iterate through all of those and do that calculation. And then it's going to take them, it's going to sort them by the distance, and then just take the number of results that we've asked for and return them. Okay. When I tried writing this in Apex, it took a very long time, and I ended up scrapping the project completely, just because it's just outside the remit of the things that you can do. Because we're working with a large data set, we need it to be fast because we want to be able to call this right from the UI. Does that kind of make sense around why you would do it in a function?
It does.
Yes, it
and
does.
I can't wait to go play with these now that I've got some more background on them and do more than I was. Yeah.
Can you back this up for me as an architect with a code developer in parentheses? So you've got VS Code open. You have opened a project that you're going to deploy to where?
Okay. So let's go back to the slides
And
for
if
a
you
second.
tell me NDA again, or can't talk about it, I'm hanging up and this session is over.
And really
Yeah.
quick, before you go into his, what is the
Do I
name
have
of your
that here?
repo again?
It's functions recipes.
Okay, functions recipes. And it's not
Yeah.
under your name though in your repo. It's
No.
under
It's under
Trailhead
Trailhead apps.
Trailhead,
Yeah, Trailhead
apps, functions,
Yeah.
recipes. Perfect.
Mhm.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, of course. No, so I actually don't have that slide in here, but that's fine. I can talk about it. So your functions are running in a space that's parallel to your org with inside our trusted infrastructure. And so when you deploy your functions, they're running inside of a Docker container that is then hosted on a server that your org has direct access to.
Okay.
And so you're not like, and I'll show you how to call this from Apex in a minute, but you're not actually having to go out and do the call out. So when you deploy functions, you'll see them build and deploy into your company's space. And with that space, they can then be referenced from Salesforce, and they're pretty much spun up every time you need access. And
Okay,
so
are
they're
they
not constantly running.
So is there a configuration, like a sandbox configuration inside of the org setup that you can say, I have this many containers, this many nodes, this much CPU?
So you have a prod space and a test space. Okay, your prod space is automatically connected. Every time you spin up a scratch org or a sandbox, it references your test space, and you authenticate through your production space. It's slightly confusing, but if you walk through the dev guide, it's pretty easy to get set up. Okay. And so you can then have your list of environments, and then all of your yeah.
Okay,
and so all of your
thank you.
All of your functions live together in that space as well. So when you deploy a function, you're deploying all of them. Okay. So when you deploy from your local environment, you're deploying all your functions. And currently, you have to develop them locally to get them pushed.
Okay, that's good to know too. All right.
Yeah, but what's great about this is, so I've got a lot of comments in here. Okay, got a lot of comments, got a little bit of code, and it's 90 lines of JavaScript, including all of the spaces, all the padding, all the comments. Okay. If you have a super confident JavaScript developer, even if you have a mediocre JavaScript developer at your company, they've probably written functions before, because this is almost identical to writing a function in AWS, on Azure, or anywhere, okay? Because it's using web standards to accomplish this. The only difference is you have that direct access to your Salesforce org and data. So taking this function here, so we've got our schools function. If I go into Apex here, once that's deployed, it's super easy to get access. And so in this case, I have our invoke process large data function class. Okay. We can literally just call the functions namespace here in Apex and define a function, and then get it by its name. That's it. So all we have to do is have our function's name and then the name of our space as well. And we have our function that we can invoke. And so we've called this our LDV function for large data volumes. And once we get it using the function's namespace, we have it in our Apex class. Then all we have to do is call large data function.invoke and pass in our payload. Then from there, you can see here, if there's any errors for the invocation, we can respond them. We can get the response from the invocation and then return the response. So it's super simple. So we've got 90 lines of JavaScript, 26 lines of Apex, and we've got a function that does all of that work for us. So then when we want to use it, in this case, this one is written for us to get from a Lightning Web component. So in that case, I can go into my LWC here for our process large data function component. And in my JavaScript, I'm just importing that method. So I'm importing that invoke method here from my process large data function class. Okay, and then in this one, I'm going to do a couple of things first. I'm going to get the geolocation of the current user, just so that I know that I can get their location to calculate the distance. If it's not provided, they live at Salesforce Tower if they blocked access to their location. And then when I want to go and get the nearby locations, all I have to do is construct that payload here in the constant. So I've got this user's latitude, longitude, and then the length of the results they would like. And then I can just call that invoke method, pass it the payload, and then do what I need to do with the data. And in this case, I'm just going to assign it to a lightning map. Okay, but the important bit is all I have to do is call that invoke method and pass it the payload, and it's going to take that payload and just put it right into the function. And that's what's important to remember is when you're communicating with functions, all you're passing in is that payload and getting back a response. There's no complex or convolutedness to that communication. You can then assign your parameters as you like within your function and your Apex class, but you're just passing that string payload back and forth. Okay, so if you want to see what this looks like real quick, in the functions recipe tab, we have some implementation examples here. And in this case, like I said, we've got an LWC here that's going to take that number of results. So let's say we want 15 results back. And if I go back into the function, just so you can see the correlation there, I've got my large data function. Let's go JavaScript still. Here, I've got that length here that I'm passing in as that property. So that's how it determines how many results that I'd like. And here's where you can see that it's going to go ahead and slice those so that it only gives me what I want back. So I want 15 results and I can invoke it. I could give the browser my location. Oh, it's turned off. So I live in San Francisco today. And it should be running that function. And it's gone through, processed through all that data and given me those 15 nearest locations to me in that function. Super quick.
That is pretty darn snazzy, dude.
Yeah.
Talk about a time saver and an effort saver. That's going to help with projects. That's going to help with stress. And it's going to be fun to play with. Now that I know how far I can take, an idea how much further I can start taking it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's super easy to get started. Now, going back to your question about flow. So I've done the same thing, except with an invocable method here. And if you don't know what an invocable method is, it enables you to call an Apex method from Flow or Process Builder, but let's talk about Flow, and give it a label, and then format the data structure to a way that Flow accepts. And so in this case, once again, we just have our payload that's coming in from the Flow. We're going to just go and get our function. We're going to serialize the payload and invoke it and come back with our response. And so here we have our response from our function. We have our output that we're going to send to the Flow and send that over. And the only difference between the method that we're calling from a Lightning Web Component to the one we're calling from Flow is that we just have to define the inputs and outputs in the format that Flow needs. So in this case, we are going to input the latitude, the longitude, and the length as specific properties. And then we're going to output the list of schools. And this defines what a school is. So the name, description, street, city, state, and zip code. So now when I go into setup here, I can show you what that looks like inside of Flow. I have our Flow example.
I'm just going to go ahead and bookmark that I am wanting to make a progressive insurance joke.
Of course.
But I'm not going to.
No worries. Yeah, so here's our Apex action where we're just passing in the input values here. So our latitude, our length, and our longitude. And then the Flow is going to decide where it assigns the properties when they come back. And then just display them on a screen. So it's super simple, but we just wanted to show how you can call the Flow from, or call the function from Flow directly. And so if I go then into our implementation examples, start that over. And I'm going to make up a fake latitude and longitude. We'll see where it puts us. Put a minus there. Okay. And when I press next, it's going to pass that to the function and return the result right for my Flow. And so apparently I'm in Hawaii. Oh, okay. I picked Hawaii as my Latin longe, or at least that's the nearest one to it. So maybe it's somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. That's just an example.
Aren't lat longe usually 2-digit decimal numbers, and you gave it like a 6-digit?
I did, but it's
pretty big. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've got another question for you. I'm a
did
very
something.
visual person, Stephen. I'm so sorry.
Mhm.
So I'm sitting here watching this, and this is all pretty cool and stuff. And I'm going, all right, so I now know some of the finance stuff I can do with the interreplacement Apex and to work with Flow. What can I do with like Slack and bots? Yeah.
Yep. With functions. So in this instance, all of the transactions have to go through Apex. And so there isn't any other way of getting to the function other than via Apex. And so you can call it through an invocable through a bot, because obviously the same invocable methods that we're using with Flow, you can call from bots. You just have to provide the output in the way that the bot likes. You can also, I guess, you can also put Lightning Web Components into bots as well. So you could technically put this, if it were big enough, into the bot. You'd have to rejig the UI a little bit, but you can put this entire LWC into a bot, prompt the user to return it, and show it based on the criteria that's been put in. From Slack, if you have a Slack app that's communicating with Salesforce, you can get access to a function, but you kind of have to go through a couple of layers to get there.
But if I use the Slack API, I could do it. Like if I built out a Slack app to the Slack API to go, or because I've been working on some Slack apps that work with Salesforce to do like some XC4Cs. I've gotten really big into it. I can't seem to stop.
Yeah. No, there's some really cool stuff you can build with Slack apps. It's just the key to functions to understand is it has to route through Salesforce. Like the transaction has to hit Salesforce at some point to get access to the function.
Gotcha. Because when you said onboarding, my head immediately went to Slack, because that's
totally
that I was just building out was onboarding in Slack.
Yeah, big time. Yeah. Eventually on the roadmap to be able to access them externally, but it's not something that's sort of in the near term for functions.
Are you able to use the functions? Sorry, I'm trying not to call them lambdas. Your functions so normally they're meant to be fairly stateless and not have external connectivity. You're passing it a file, having it process file, and sending the results back. Are you able to make web calls out from the function stack to other locations? And how are those marshaled as far as licensing Salesforce Connect? Are those considered, do those count as your Salesforce outbound connections?
Really quick, I'm going to guess you would, because you've got trusted sites inside your repo.
So the functions themselves can make call outs wherever you want them to on the web, including to Salesforce. It's important to note that your API bucket limit is separate. So it's a separate API limit from calling into Salesforce or writing into Salesforce. There are no limits for calling out. You can call out as much as you like. And when you talk about them being stateless, they're spun up in a container when you need them. So each function, every time you need it, it's spun up in a container and you have access to it for that period of time. And so it will take them in order as they're received and return the results back. And you can call it as much as you like to anywhere. There's an example that we have.
Sorry, stateless is the wrong word. I think there's an analog to anonymous, and they're not supposed to have data. Data's not supposed to persist inside of a true anonymous function. So
there is no data store as part of functions. Everything that exists in the transaction, if you want to keep it, you've got to pass it back in the response to Salesforce. So for example, in that large data function, we're calculating the distance for all of those schools. Once we have the top 5 or top 10, we don't need the rest of it, and so it's trashed in the transaction once the transaction's complete and pass its response back. Now you can do DML against Salesforce objects from your function using the Salesforce SDK as well, which is important to note. And so if I go quick into the slides, and we've already been kind of through the anatomy and how to invoke. But the function, specifically the one for Node, is super helpful, great to know. And it allows you to query data from Salesforce. It allows you to perform DML against Salesforce, get access to the org, get access to the user, and call the Salesforce APIs because you have a session ID, which is very helpful. An example that we've been working on lately is, I think I talked about it at the last user group meeting, is actually processing an integration through a function. And so each time the function is run, for example, maybe you want to schedule it daily in a batch, it's calling up to an external server, getting a CSV, and then taking that CSV and then pushing it through the bulk API so that you're doing that data integration, doing an upsert of a large file through a function, which is something you would normally have to have a middleware solution for. So in this case, you can actually, in the function, go and get the file, pass it to the bulk API, and upsert all of the data into Salesforce through the function, which cuts a lot of corners that you would normally have to take to do an integration like that.
Slightly silly question. Are they easily deployable, or is it one of those roundabout weird different APIs inside the yeah?
No, so you have to deploy them through SFDX,
Okay,
but
it's
literally
so it's got to be DX.
It does, yeah. So, but all I have to do is run SF deploy now in my command line.
But an admin couldn't deploy it through a change set?
No, not functions, because they don't live in your org, Salesforce. They're hosted parallel.
What about that
So
new
in this
dev
case,
center that's supposedly coming out, or possibly in beta or pilot?
At the moment, as far as I'm aware, functions aren't included in that.
Okay.
Functions are hosted slightly separately. Yeah.
And so in this case, stuff you can't talk about.
Yeah, and they
I'm sorry.
So it's important to note that the functions do have to be managed through Git as well. So you have to have them on a Git branch to deploy them.
Forced source control. Oh my gosh, I really love these things. That's amazing.
Yeah. So for example, so you can see here, it's I've not set that up properly. I've got to add this.
Sorry for all the weird questions. Of course, I'm in a deployment phase right now, and I've got to think about deployment and how this went off. Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you're here, Megan, or it would have just been me making dad jokes and trying to understand this.
Right, so here it's going to push my changes. Great. And so it's deployed all of my changes to functions. There isn't anything. So either way, it'll usually do the build and deploy steps and push them into the space so that they're up to date in the org.
Nice. How long till they time out?
So they don't. So they're spun up on demand.
Well, what if I spin it up on demand, like, and it doesn't, like, would it time out, or would it just go forever? Like, what if it's got something that gets it in a loop or something?
That's a good question that I don't have an answer to, but not a problem that I've seen yet in all of our testing. And Julian and I have broken functions a few times already.
You've never seen when I did DX when it came out. I couldn't stop making scratch orgs for days.
That's funny. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you'll probably get an email from your account manager. That's what would happen.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because you've hit your million invocations already.
I'm still waiting for them to track my flow pattern back to me. I'm assuming I'm going to get some emails pretty soon.
Yeah.
My infinite flows.
Yeah.
And then do you have any, like, speaking of limits, what about, like, so if there's not like a timeout limit or a connection limit, what about like a size limit or like a payload limit? Yeah.
There is. I have to pull up the limits doc.
All good. All
hold
good.
on, I've got it here. Where is it? Limits. There is a limits doc here for everyone to go through.
Can you check for your limits like you can in your Apex with your function? Can you check for your function limits? Yeah.
Ooh, that's a great question. I'm not sure actually how to get the functions limits. That's a good question.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, because there are limits, obviously.
Yeah.
But something, something to call back to, and that I can come back to in the chat at the bottom. But really, my tip is just to get the functions recipes app, and it will kind of give you a great idea around how to use functions. Like, so for example, just a quick rundown before we finish up here.
And put the link to the repos in the chat if you wanted to have it up, at least look into this stuff too. Yeah. Yeah,
totally. But so, like, for example, say we want to query from Salesforce. Yeah. This is a function that will just show you how to run a SQL query from your function. So say you're doing your calculation, you need to go back and query for some more data from the org, you can do that. If you need to get the org info, so this is an example of how to use that org info class here and just get like the API version, the URL, the domain. And I can, like, for example, I can run this from the UI and it's going to get back all of that stuff from the function. And so you have really access to almost everything that you need. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is the unit of work pattern, which is a wider programming concept, but really applied well in functions. And it allows you to go through and create a unit of work here, which is essentially a transaction as part of a graph within Salesforce. So if you've heard of the composite graph API, it allows you to take like an account and a contact and a case and assign the IDs and insert them all in one go without having to actually loop through and wait for one to be created. It knows how to string together those relationships. And that's what this does inside of functions. And so, for example, I can create an account where here I'm just assigning the name, and then I can create a contact here, and I'm registering that create and then passing in that account ID as just a reference, and then doing the same thing with a case and another follow-up case. And so it allows me to take that and associate the parent ID, the account ID, the contact ID from the previous operation, and adds them to that unit of work, and literally just go ahead and commit those into Salesforce. So it will then go ahead and commit that unit of work and bring back the response. And so it can create all of those records in Salesforce in one go. And you can have 500 groupings of those. So you could have 500 accounts, contacts, and 1,000 cases all in that single transaction, which is super helpful for large data projects.
Quick question, is there any limit onto which objects you can use? For example, enterprise territory management. Can I use my rule item in my object rule and my territory?
So the permissions are granted to the automated process user through a functions permission set.
Okay.
Okay, and
so
anything that you can add, anything you can add to that functions permission set, you should be able to have access to. And
so
if there's anything that
territories, we should be fine.
Yeah. And
Oh,
if you
awesome.
don't, let us know and we'll make sure that it can be added to that user.
Okay, I'm gonna let you know how it goes this weekend. How about that?
Yep. Ping me if you have any questions.
Awesome. Loading territories and territory rules and rule items is kind of a pain in the butt. So always trying to import them. It's like the weird metadata you can deploy or import. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. That could just solve one of my deployment hour issues. Thank you.
Well, and that puts me to the last point that I wanted to make, and that's how to get started with functions. And so even if you don't have a functions enabled org, you can write functions locally and you can connect it to your org. And so you can write the function and you can invoke it from the command line without having access to Salesforce functions in a production org or in a scratch org. So that's the easiest way to get started. So before you get a functions org, download functions and play around with them in the command line, and you can invoke them and get your Salesforce data and perform transactions on your local machine without needing an org. Okay. However, there are some functions trials orgs. They are limited. So I ask that you only request one if you're going to use it within the next 30 days. And you can get that at sfdc.co/FN trial and get access to functions. Okay, but only do it if you have time to play around with functions or if you have a use case. Or you can contact your account manager and have functions enabled in your production org if you're a customer. But so everyone can get their hands on functions now. They're in an enterprise trial org though, so they're valid for 30 days. And then at the end of that 30 days, you can sign up for another one, or your org will be given to another lovely person who would like to have access to functions.
More deserving user, got it.
Yeah, I mean, and on top of that, I mean, that's pretty much the gist of what I wanted to show today. Does anyone else have any other questions? Do either of you have any other points you wanted to go through real quick?
No, it's phenomenal. I think I almost understand it.
So
great.
Yeah, this was really cool. I guess I do have another question. Previously, was functions only available to people in certain industry orgs, or am I losing my mind? Yeah.
No, it was in pilot and beta for a while.
Okay.
It just went GA, and now everyone has access. But it's not been in a production GA state for specific industries. It was open to everyone at the same time.
Gotcha. I was thinking it was in a financial services org. All good.
Cool.
Maybe my client was just piloting.
Yeah. So I know I'm still processing, so I'm not going to have enough. I mean, I'll have questions about an hour later after I settle into bed.
I think this has been great. I think it's definitely worth having a follow-up as well.
Yeah, no, this is super
we've gone through a start. I think it'd be great to have a follow-up in a couple of weeks as well to go through some more around functions as ideas go, and as we're still learning as well and taking this message out and around on tour.
Yeah, Megan and I can go try and break them.
Yes, please do. Come back with your own demo.
Oh, I am going to do my best to try to break this, but I'm also going to do my best to try to get all that territory stuff all set with this, with what you just showed me.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and go and take our code on functions recipes.
I already did.
Easiest way to get started. Yeah, cool. Yeah. Perfect.
Like I didn't do that while you were talking. Jeez, come on, Steve. You know me better than that.
All right. Well, great. Thank you very much, Stephan. I'm going to go ahead and wrap the the recording right here. Stephan's given you all of his information. He's easy to find. He's one of the most common, most technical speakers, easy to access and very prolific. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time trying to help people find you, since you are very easily findable for those who are interested. Megan, thank you for joining last minute and adding some great commentary. We will follow up. I hope maybe do another session, but in the start of December, sneak one out and invite one or two more people here and build on this. Thank you again.
Awesome.
Thanks all.
Of course. See you later.